Hey guys, welcome back to Moonlight Sleepless. Tonight we glide high above mortal rooftops to the glittering chill of Mount Olympus, where gossip sleeps with lightning under a silver blanket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me your city and the exact time glowing on your bedside clock. I love seeing our worldwide night shift assemble. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moon pours over marble cornices like watered milk, frosting every gold-tipped column until the palace looks half-dipped in quiet. Goblets abandoned after the feast lie sideways on balconies, their last drops of nectar cooling into syrup. Even Dionysus, champion of one more round, has surrendered to the hush. Olympus tonight wants nothing louder than a sigh. Inside the great hall, Hestia tames the hearth to a low ember, warm as a sleeping cat, yet no brighter than fireflies. Her restrained flame draws gentle shadows that climb pillared walls and retreat, as though the building itself is breathing. Above the roof, Selene steers her silver chariot across the stars, smudging out scorch marks left by Zeus's thunderbolts. In their place, she leaves a soft path of light that feels like snow landing on skin. Scattered along the corridors, the gods lounge in various states of half-dream. Ares snores inside his armor, the occasional metal clank announcing a twitchy, heroic fantasy. Apollo, slumped against a column, still grips his lyre by its neck, the final chord trapped between his fingers like a reluctant firefly. Aphrodite combs hair that shines of its own accord, yet pauses every few strokes to glance at the doorway, half expecting an admirer who miscalculated his curfew. At the mountain's heart, Zeus sprawls across silken sheets, thunderbolts stacked in regal obedience at the bedfoot. Each exhale rings a tiny silver bell, hooked to the rafters, a lullaby suspiciously delicate for the usual king of storms. Somewhere a lone cloud remembers its job, rumbles once, then blushes into silence. If you were tiptoeing along those cloud-woven steps outside, you would see mortal city lights below, shimmering like embers at the bottom of a dark kiln. Tilt your head up, and entire constellations swirl overhead, unfinished sketches of old bragging rights. The breeze slips by, tasting of pine and distant salt, and something feather-soft brushes the eaves. It is not a bird. It is the first ripple of Hera's midnight suspicion, still shaping itself, already fluttering like a moth against a lamp. Sentries at their posts fight heavy eyelids, helmets listing to starboard. Nymphs near the reflecting pool quietly race ripples across glassy water, giggling as though liquid could tattletale. Grasshoppers orchestrate a syncopated choir from the lawn, each chirp distant enough to feel as if it originates on your own pillow. Olympus breathes in one long, slow, collective yawn. Tonight we are only silent, spectator shadow thin, drifting from arch to arch. Match your breathing to the hollow hush of those corridors. In, out, slow as ivy unfurling. Hear how the marble softens under moonlight, how the garden vines sway in a rhythm that wants to cradle you. This is the calm before jealousy sprouts wings and painted eyes, but you do not need to worry about that yet. Let the slow pulse of Olympus sync with your own. Each inhalation a tide, each heartbeat a hidden drum. Somewhere deep in the colonnade, a single rose petal loosens from a garland and falls soft, decisive, almost prophetic. It lands without a sound, and the future shivers, though only the night takes notice. Settle deeper under your blanket, trust the mountain to stand guard, and let the cool, scented air drift through your thoughts the way Selene's light slides over rooftops. When dawn finally presses apricot fingers against the eastern ridge, you will already be floating inside the myth, weightless as a petal on that same night breeze. And by the time Hera's doubts crystallize into a creature of 100 eyes, you will be so cozy you might mistake thunder for distant ocean waves. Breathe, listener. Olympus has dimmed its lanterns just for you. A little farther along the moon-washed corridor, behind doors carved with lilies and thunderstorms, Hera lies awake in a bed large enough to float a minor island. Ivory posts frame a canopy of gauze that breathes with every draft, yet the queen of Olympus cannot coax her own breaths into sync. She smooths her pillow griffin down, naturally, and flips it to the cool side for the 4th time. The coolness vanishes instantly, soaked up by a warmth that feels suspiciously like irritation. Zeus's faint snores drift through the connecting arch, each one a smug drumroll. How, she wonders, does a serial philanderer sleep so soundly? She tries the oldest remedy, counting lightning bolts. 1, 2. By the 4th, she is already picturing her husband slipping out tomorrow in a brand new disguise, perhaps rain cloud chic, or something avian if he's feeling nostalgic. She vows to sabotage the wardrobe of swans at first light. A deep sigh escapes before she can stop it, and the gauze canopy ripples as though sharing her exasperation. Outside the window, a night breeze sweeps across the balcony, bringing in the scent of pine resin and distant sea spray. On another night, such perfume might lull her, but tonight it smells like evidence. Why else would the wind carry the sea this far uphill unless someone planned a shoreline rendezvous? Hera narrows her eyes at the innocent horizon. Somewhere down there, she is sure, lives a mortal who has no idea her next suitor arrives wrapped in thunder. She rolls onto her back and studies the ceiling fresco, a triumphal scene of her own wedding doves, garlands, everyone smiling too hard. The paint has aged flawlessly, but she now notices tiny cracks where laughter was applied too thick. The longer she gazes, the more the doves seem poised to fly right off and file restraining orders. She closes her eyes. Mistake. The inside of her eyelids becomes an unlicensed theater. Swans, bulls, golden rainstorms, all parading past under a flickering sign that reads, "Coming soon." With a groan, she sits up, silk sheets sighing around her. The queen extends her senses the way generals extend perimeters. Somewhere in the corridors, she detects the faintest Giglia nymph offloading gossip, or maybe just tripping over her own toga. Either option feels incriminating. Hera's fingers drum the mattress in metronomic judgment. She contemplates sending a peacock to patrol, but even her favorite birds deserve better than night shifts fueled by suspicion. Minutes are centuries. Time bends for the Sleepless in a hush broken only by the ticking of her thoughts. She considers waking Zeus, demanding honesty right now. But the imagined conversation ends with furniture on fire and no one getting any rest. Instead, she reaches for a small onyx box at her bedside. Inside lie tiny rolled scrolls, vows Zeus once made, each glowing with divine promise. Hera unfurls one labeled Eternal Fidelity, watches the letters flicker like nervous fireflies, then gently re-rolls it before the parchment can start lying. She tries deep breathing again, in through the nose, out through the matrimonial grievances. It almost works. The snoring subsides. Perhaps Zeus has turned over. For a heartbeat, the room feels tranquil, like a lake that hasn't realized a storm is inbound. Hera settles back onto the cool side of the pillow yet again and lets her eyelids lower. But no sooner does she hover at the edge of sleep than a new thought taps her shoulder. What if the calm itself is the cover story? The gods invented omens after all. Zeus could be sleeping theatrically. She imagines him clutching a thunderbolt under the blanket, the way a child clutches a runaway cookie innocent pose. Masking guilty intent, her eyes snap open. Still, even a goddess runs out of energy. Jealousy is a fire that must occasionally bank its own coals, lest it burn out of control. Hera exhales, slow and steady, letting the night breeze thread her hair. Somewhere in the garden, a single night-blooming lily opens with a whisper, releasing a fragrance rich enough to soften iron resolve. She focuses on that scent, lets it braid through her thoughts, and at last her heartbeat finds a quieter drum. For now, the queen permits her doubts to coil into a darker corner of the room, curled but awake, like a cat that keeps one eye slit open. Morning will arrive soon enough, and with it decisions about disguises and patrols and perhaps a very large guardian with many more eyes than usual. For this fleeting hour, though, Hera slips into a light, wary Dozione ear, tilted toward the corridor, one hand on her pillow, the promise of vigilance wrapped around her like a second sheet. Rest, listener. The mountain stirs, but its queen has not yet sounded the alarm. Earlier that very evening, long before Hera's pillow lost its chill, Olympus had been ablaze with torches and laughter. Tables stretched across the grand courtyard like strips of donolive wood polished to a honey glow, overloaded with figs, roasted pheasant, and amphorae sweating cold nectar. Muses strummed soft chords, each note sliding over nerves like warm oil. In that golden commotion, Zeus occupied the central couch, a casual king reclining on crimson cushions, indulging the performers with nods that meant play faster, shine brighter, flatter me harder. Hera, of course, presided at his side, her smile a marble carving, flawless, immovable, perilously close to cracking. She chatted with Demeter about harvest rituals, with Athena about new laws for Athens. But her peripheral vision ran its own patrol, sweeping the crowd for any sign of mischief. For a blissful half hour, nothing unusual happened. No sudden showers of gold, no white bulls nudging palace gates, but vigilance has a way of summoning the very trouble it tries to prevent. Near the fountain spray, an unfamiliar sparkle caught Zeus's eye. A mortal girl, invited as part of a regional delegation, standing half in shadow as if the party were a dream she might wake from. Her name Io floated to Olympus on the polite introductions of priests, but Zeus hardly needed a name. What mattered was the steady blaze of curiosity now warming his gaze. Io poured wine for her companions with two-handed care, intent on not spilling a drop. Every tilt of her wrist sent torchlight flickering along the curve of her arm. Zeus's conversation with Poseidon lost momentum like a cart stuck in mud. He hummed vague agreements, eyes drifting past the sea god's shoulder. At first, Hera assumed her husband was brooding over some grand strategy, did that occasionally, like a boy frowning at puzzle pieces. Then she followed the trajectory of his attention and found Io framed by spray and firelight, the droplets around her hair shining like tiny captive stars. An ember of annoyance popped in Hera's chest. She sipped her nectar, tasting only seeds of suspicion. The banquet's noise thickened, yet Hera's senses filtered everything but Zeus's breathing, the restless twitch of his hand upon the goblet stem, the almost smile he wore when Io laughed at something. A priest whispered. The queen told herself this was routine. The king of gods possessed a wandering gaze, the way storms possess thunder, but routine did not soothe. She watched Zeus lean back in a stretch that showed off shoulders sculpted by hubris. The motion tilted his throne just enough to face the fountain more squarely, like a sunflower obeying dawn. A minor satyr tried entertaining the crowd with panpipes, hitting notes so sharp they shaved the edges off conversation, yet Zeus barely blinked. When Io reached to refill a cup, her sleeve slipped, revealing a small birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. The king's brows lifted in appreciative surprise, an expression Hera recognized too well. Discovery followed by appraisal, followed swiftly by plotting. The ember flared into a spark. Hera straightened, silk gown whispering across the tiles. She joined the general laughter at a jest from Hermes, but her pupils stayed locked on Zeus. A tactical decision unfolded in her mind. Intervene now and risk a public stormer. Wait, gather proof, corner him later where marble walls could contain the thunderclap. Wait, she decided, though the choice tasted bitter. Below, Io felt a tingle of attention without knowing its source. She glanced around, caught the king's eyes, and looked away quickly, cheeks warming. That shy turn of her head landed on Zeus, like a scented letter. Hera's pulse thudded. Somewhere beneath the music she imagined, hearing the faint crack of eggshell, the moment jealousy hatches and tests its wings. The feast rolled on. Apollo shifted to a gentler melody. Dionysus led a toast. Nymphs braided each other's hair with myrtle sprigs. Yet the courtyard's air had changed, just a degree, the way pressure shifts before lightning. Hera traced the invisible current from Zeus to Io and back again. It was thin as spider silk, but she knew how quickly such threads thickened into snares. At last, torches burned low, guests dispersed, and the fountain quieted to a silver hush. Hera rose, nodded good-night to the remaining dignitaries, and swept toward the palace interior, each footstep measured, silent, sharp enough to slice doubt from certainty. Behind her, Zeus lingered among empty dishes, watching the path Io took out of the courtyard with interest too bright to hide. Hera did not turn, but her jaw tightened. She carried that spark up the corridor, cradling it like smoldering coal, ready to light any tinder left carelessly near her heart. The ember Hera carried to bed refused to cool. Elsewhere in the palace, Zeus felt its warmth and knew dawn would pry open every secret. Once the last attendants bowed out, he shed his lazy banquet smile and strode toward the outer portico, cloak snapping like the start of weather. Temptation needed camouflage immediately, before suspicion grew talons. Io lingered on her balcony, starlight woven through her hair. Invited only as a humble priestess, she still floated between awe and disbelief. A salted breeze lifted her cloak. Her laugh rang like glass touched by wind. Zeus emerged from shadow, face calm as a moonlit lake. Reverence bent Io to one knee, but he raised her gently, words spilling like warm honey. "Trust me, you are safe. The gods reward purity." A cooling mist curled around them, thickening at his unspoken command. Hera's eyes roamed farther than constellations. he warned. "Let me shield you." Io started to ask what danger stalked a temple girl, yet the clouds swallowed her voice. Soft vertigo rippled through her limbs. Bones shifted. Skin bloomed into ivory fur. Fingers blurred together as if sculpted by warm hands. A heartbeat later she stood on 4 slender legs, breath fogging the evening air. Her attempt to cry out escaped as an uncertain moo. For a stunned minute she stood, cataloging the alien symphony of muscles that twitched beneath new hide. Tail flicked pulsing like an exclamation point, ears swiveling to collect every whisper, nostrils drinking air in bright drafts instead of modest breaths. Marble tiles lay colder, wider, slick. Balance came from hips she had never studied. She noticed absurdly that terror smelled faintly of crushed violets, and that moonlight draped her new body in unearned innocency and irony so sharp that it stung sharper than any mortal blade. Zeus brushed the snowy ridge of her neck. "No one will guess," he murmured, admiring his haste-born creation. Boot, heels, echoed on the stair, Hera's cadence, measured and metallic. He hurried the heifer behind a laurel urn just as the queen appeared, robe swirling like restrained thunder. Her gaze landed on the animal with predatory grace. "What a lovely creature," she cooed, voice honey laid over iron. "A gift for your faithful wife." Zeus aimed for a careless shrug. "Only a stray from the gardens." "Then you won't object if I keep her." A silken lead appeared in Hera's hand as naturally as lightning in a storm. Io's new heart pounded while the loop tightened around her throat. Hera's lips twitched at her husband's silent protest. She tugged once, and hooves clacked across marble the sound of doors closing on another secret. Torchlight painted their path toward the cypress paddock, guards trailing at a respectful distance. Io's heightened senses drank details she wished to forget. Metallic armor, vines whispering against stone, Hera's perfume masking a sharper scent of triumph. Moonlight turned the cow's tears to silver beads. A young nymph noticed and politely looked away. Inside the enclosure, Hera smoothed Io's flank with almost maternal care. "Rest here," she whispered, instructions floating to sentries who ringed the garden like chess pieces. When the queen departed, the world shrank to night breeze and distant fountains. Io raised her muzzle toward valleys that still remembered her name. She tried forming a prayer, but it left her throat as a low tremor rolling across trimmed grass. Stars blinked out, making room for fragile dawn. Each fading light felt like a door closing, yet the darkest sky often hides the narrowest paths. Io steadied her hooves, letting the earth remind her she was still alive, still thinking, even inside borrowed skin. Somewhere, she decided, a way past jealousy's fence must exist. For now the mountain slept. Hera dreamed of vigilance. Zeus wrestled regret, and a white heifer breathed fog into the cooling night, waiting for the next turn of fate's kaleidoscope. She did not know that destiny was already counting her steps. Dawn slid over Olympus like silk, stroking treetops first, then untangling itself across colonnades, until even the cypress paddock glimmered. Io, still adjusting to hooves and horns, caught the sunrise in twin glassy eyes and hoped light might burn away her nightmare. Instead, it delivered company. Gravel crunched beneath a weight heavier than chariot wheels, and an immense shadow lumbered through the gate. Argus Panoptesthi Sentinel, whose every blink was plural. Argus looked pieced together from watchtowers. Shoulders broader than barn doors rose beneath a cloak the color of storm water, and on every patch of exposed skin, globes of amber regard clicked open like latches. Some eyes studied Io. Others scanned birds, clouds, even the quiet way sunbeams sharpened the fence posts. A dozen more peered inward, as if monitoring his own thoughts for treasonous naps. When he inhaled, eyelids fluttered in ripples down his torso. When he exhaled, they steadied again, aligning like shields stacked for war. Hera followed 2 paces behind, robes whispering satisfaction. "Argus, darling," she said, tone light, yet iron cord. "Keep this pretty heifer safe. She is dear to my heart." The giant's primary facef one could choose among 100 bowed, with the deliberation of a tree in soft wind. Hera stroked Io's neck once, a gesture both tender and proprietary, then swept away, cloak trailing a scent of triumph laced with lilies. Left alone, Argus set to work with the diligence of a lighthouse sprouting legs. He paced the perimeter, massive feet embedding fresh prints in dew-laden grass. Each orbit left new impressions literal and figurative on Io, who felt surrounded even when he stood still. Some eyes tracked butterflies, others studied the subtleties of her breathing, as though comparing it to bovine baseline metrics etched in cosmic spreadsheets. Hours passed, marked not by bells, but by the choreography of surveillance. When a breeze flirted with nearby olive branches, Argus's outermost eyes traced each dancing leaf, while inner rings kept steady focus on the paddock. The effect was hypnotic-like, watching a field of sunflowers, tracking multiple suns, but also curiously soothing. Here was vigilance so absolute that even doubt had nowhere to hide. If Hera's jealousy was a storm, Argus served as the breakwater, absorbing every wave before it reached fragile shores. Io attempted small rebellions. She trotted to the farthest corner, pretended fascination with a tuft of grass, then lunged unexpectedly toward the gate. Without haste, Argus planted one enormous palm across the exit to wall that smelled faintly of granite baked in midday heat, while undeveloped eyes on his back never paused studying the horizon. He hummed a baritone lull, a soundless note that resembled boulders settling into earth. Resigned, Io retreated, noticing for the first time how silence can deepen when cut into by watchfulness. Yet even giants get bored. By afternoon sunlight turned his cloak into a portable greenhouse, and one eye near his elbow drifted closed. Immediately another snapped wider, reprimanding its sibling. He shifted, stirring fallen petals with a motion tectonic yet gentle, and began recounting clouds. Io sensed the lull, her own eyelids newly broad, ill-matched to human memories drooping despite fear. Under Argus's omnidirectional gaze, the paddock became paradoxically peaceful, like falling asleep beneath an umbrella of protective constellations. As twilight bruised the sky, torches flickered along palace walls. Their glow scattered coppery reflections across Argus's 1,000 irises, turning him into a one-giant galaxy spinning in slow orbit around a single bewildered star cow. Above, Selene's chariot rose once more, painting Io's white coat silver. For the first time since transformation, she let breath settle deep, trusting, however reluctantly, that those many eyes would not allow harm it, least not harm of the ordinary sort. Outside the fence, distant corridors filled with harp practice and gossip. Inside, Sleep crept toward Io on soft hooves. Argus stood silent sentinel, unmoving except for the patient sweeping of pupils tuning themselves to night. Hera, somewhere high in her chamber, felt the reverberation of unwavering duty and smiled into her pillow, confident her suspicions now wore armor. Meanwhile, Zeus paced a thundercloud, mind racing through contingencies, each flash of lightning reflecting an image of a white heifer trapped beneath an unblinking sky. And so, the mountains settled into evening meditation. One queen satisfied, one king plotting, one guardian blinking like a lighthouse of flesh, and one innocent creature drifting toward uneasy dreamsol, held inside the quiet hum of 100 watchful eyes. Night slides back over Olympus like a second eyelid, darker, cooler, and infinitely more patient than the first. By the paddock torchlight retires, replaced by the vast, slow glitter of constellations. Every star seems bigger here, as though altitude sharpens the sky's resolution, and each one finds its twin in the mirrored sheen of Argus's many pupils. He stands exactly where twilight left him, yet nothing about the scene is still. Each eye swivels on its own axis, tracking crickets in the grass, satellites in the heavens, the quiet inflation of Io's chest as she exhales a cloud of visible breath. From her corner, the white heifer watches vigilance performed as choreography. When Argus turns his head, dozens of flank eyes hold their ground. When he shifts his weight, a whole crescent of shin, eyes realigns to keep her centered. She begins to feel like the spoke of a colossal wheel, everything else orbiting her in disciplined arcs. Strange comfort seeps into her bones. If the universe must cage her, at least the bars are made of certainty. Midway through the night, the moon skims directly overhead, silvering every outline. Argus tilts his face to it. And for a long moment, the paddock is luminous, with reflections moon in his crown of eyes, moon in the varnish of Io's horns, moon in the dew clinging to cypress needles. The effect is almost ceremonial, as though some high priest of insomnia is conducting a rite with silence as incense. Io senses something inside her new skull shift. Fear loosens a muscle, curiosity stirs. She takes 3 cautious steps toward the fence, just to feel ownership of direction. The giant does not move, but 6 eyes near his collarbone follow, and the message is clear. You may wander, little star, but longitude remains mine. Wind sweeps down from higher ridges, carrying alpine cold and a faint metallic tang of lightning long spent. It quivers the laurel leaves and rustles Argus's cloak, making his eyes flicker like lanterns in a sudden draft. To pass the hours, he begins to hum no melody. Io recognizes merely a tonal murmur deep enough to tremble the dirt. The sound vibrates through her hooves, up her legs, into a rib cage still startled by its own size. She closes her eyes, trying to remember how a human heart interprets lullabies. Inside the palace, windows glow briefly as servants snuff final candles. Somewhere far above, Hera opens a shutter to inspect her living alarm system. She sees the white dot of Io, the dark pillar of Argus, and a scatter of eyes gleaming like hot coals fanned to life. Satisfied, she shuts the wood again. The click of the latch echoes down the terraces with the authority of a closed ledger. Minutes migrate into hours. Crickets, quiet. And their silence reveals a subtler rhythm, the alternating blink pattern of Argus's rose. He never shuts more than half his eyes at once, sealing rest into a checkerboard grid that resets every few breaths. It is a biological code, part art, part mathematics, that lets half his consciousness drift while half stands guard, then swaps without losing a single beat. Observing it, Io realizes a strange empathy forms between captive and watcher. They are both in different ways creatures split between states human and animal, waking and dream, promise and betrayal. Suddenly, a soft thud lands beyond the paddock wall. Instantly, every iris snaps toward the sound. The field of view contracts around a fallen fig dropped by a passing bat. Argus relaxes. But unlike a normal sentry, he does not return to one fixed gaze. Instead, his attention ripples outward again, resuming its panoramic flow. The brief surge of adrenaline leaves Io trembling, yet also buzzing with an insight. Even endless vigilance has blind moments, micro-instants, when senses teleport from one threat to the next. Above them, the Great Bear completes half an orbit. Below, torches on distant watchtowers sputter and die. Io draws the cool grass scent into lungs that were never meant for prayers, but still she shapes one silently. She asks that someone, somewhere, notice the way stars dim when crossed by jealousy, and send help before dawn paints her fur gold enough to be mistaken for a trophy. Beside her, Argus resumes his hum, a note so deep it feels older than language. In its resonance, she detects neither malice nor mercy-only duty, padded with bone. And yet duty, however inexhaustible, cannot outrun time. A single eye perched high on Argus's shoulder droops, then another. Immediately, backups flare awake. But Io has witnessed the stutter, proof that even the best locks possess hairline seams. She files the knowledge away like a stolen key, then lowers her head to graze. Grass tastes of midnight and strategy. Above, the moon begins its descent, dragging an invisible curtain of shadows over paddock, giant and restless heifer alike. Surveillance continues, but the night itself is getting sleepy. Dawn is still a pale rumor when Zeus abandons his bed and strides onto a high veranda, robes flaring like the opening bars of a storm overture. The valley below muffles its villages in mist, but the king's thoughts crackle louder than any rooster. Somewhere in the cypress paddock, a white heifer waits beneath a living curtain of eyes. Somewhere above that paddock, Hera sleeps, convinced mistrust has finally been padlocked. Zeus rubs a thumb along the edge of a thunderbolt, considering how many ways one secret can unravel. He resists the instinct to ignite the sky bluster, would only confirm guilt and instead whistles a note pitched for messenger ears. A gust of dawn arrives, before the echo can fade, and with it, Hermes, wing-sandaled and bright as fresh citrus. The god of speed lands lightly on the marble balustrade, one heel still hovering, as if momentum hates to be insulted by full stops. "You rang?" he says, twirling his caduceus, the way gamblers shuffle loaded dice. Zeus sketches the problem in taut strokes, a misunderstood mortal, currently misshaped, a jealous queen, a giant caretaker whose eyelids operate on shifts tighter than any army rota. Hermes listens, brow level, mouth curved in a half-smile that suggests every impossibility is merely a scenic detour. "You want the watchdog napping," he sums up, "preferably without Hera hearing lullabies from the next ridge." Exactly. Zeus lowers his voice until even marble strains to eavesdrop. "No violence, No thunder, just sleep. Deep, dignified, absolutely contagious. He pauses, weighing the air. And once the eyes are off duty, lead the heifer to safety. Deliver her to, he gestures vaguely toward the world's blurred horizon, somewhere she can breathe without counting rumblings in the sky. Hermes' wings rustle with suppressed laughter. A stealth extraction. I do love a dawn job. Have you considered that an audience of 100 pupils will memorize any trick I try? Zeus frowns, but Hermes raises a calming palm. Relax. Music outruns memory. I'll compose something so soporific that even Apollo would drop his lyre to nap. He pulls a reed flute from thin Aaron accessory, pocketed in the folds of possibility, and tests a scale so soft it feels like dew extrapolating itself across grass. Notes spin, then dim, until they're little more than the idea of a hum lingering in a teacup. Good, Hermes mutters. Needs a touch of brook noise, maybe a sigh shaped like warm bread. He glances at Zeus. Side effects may include Pallas, wide yawning. You fine with that? If Hera yawns, Zeus says, I will count it as a blessing. The plan takes form between them like frost, etching itself onto glass. Hermes will drift into the paddock disguised as a shepherd looking for strayed use-nothing. Invites less suspicion than someone apologizing for wool. Under that mundane veneer, a flute's harmony will spiral through the air, threading each of Argus's ears and coaxing eyelids to synchronize in surrender. Once the last pupil folds shut, a short whisper of wind will spirit Io away along goat paths, too narrow for Hera's chariot or envy. Hermes salutes, towing the edge of the balustrade. Give me 2 hours and a head start to the river. After that, thunder all you like. His smile widens into mischief's signature. And maybe keep a bouquet ready sleeping giants leave dents in your reputation. With a soft push he is airborne, feathers slicing the dawn into ribbons. Zeus watches the messenger dwindle, then exhales a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Clouds cluster at his fingertips, eager to serve, but he lets them drift. For once, the sky must stay quiet. Below, Argus continues his methodical blink ballet, unaware that the next song he hears will be tailored to his undoing. Io nudges a patch of clover, more awake than she prefers, sensing tension accumulate like static on wool. Across terraces, servants yawn inexplicably, rubbing eyes that feel heavier than their dreams deserve. An omen, perhaps, or the first pulse of Hermes' unseen metronome. The sun lifts another inch, shadows pivot like weather vanes recalibrating. Zeus retreats indoors, rehearsing an alibi sturdy enough to survive Hera's interrogation. On the wind's freshest draft rides a whisper of reed musicno, louder than silk, sliding off a hook, carrying with it the promise that even 100 eyes can be persuaded to close, if only someone sings the night back into them. Dew still clings to the paddock fence when a lone shepherd ambles up the slope, crook in hand, sandals dusty, tunic patched in exactly the charming places. A tiny bronze charm 2 wings, crossed glints on his throat before the clouds swallow it. To anyone watching, he is merely a journeyman who lost his flock. To the mountain, he is Hermes under 3 layers of plausible deniability. Argus notices everything by definition, so of course he sees the newcomer before the first pebble rolls beneath the shepherd's heel. A dozen eyes train on the stranger while the rest keep Io in crystal focus. The giant's primary face tilts, more curious than hostile, as the shepherd raises both palms in apology. "Morning, mighty sir," Hermes calls, voice pitched to landslide any suspicion into politeness. "Have you seen 3 shaggy ewes?" Wandered off while I dozed. A faint ripple of amusement passes through Argus's eyeshirtsman, should know better than to sleep on duty, and I.O. nearly gasps at the human warmth in that expression. Perhaps even monsters appreciate jokes about someone else's laziness. Hermes approaches the fence uninvited, tapping each rail with his crook as if measuring hospitality. Every knock trembles, with a resonance too soft for mortal ears, but perfectly tuned to the cartilage of vigilance. Without warning, he lifts a reed flute and lets the first note escape. It is nothing like Apollo's sun-drenched melodies or Dionysus's revel screams. This tone is a sigh stitched from moss and distant waterfalls, a lull that trickles through the paddock like honey melting in tea. It asks nothing, demands nothing. It simply suggests that eyes are overrated compared with dream. Argus's shoulders relax, a fraction barely enough to shift the shadows, but I.O. senses the change in barometric pressure. She watches, mesmerized, as eyelids inhale the music. Row by row, concentric circles of vision soften. The ones closest to Hermes blink once, twice, then hang at half-mast like lanterns in early fog. Outer eyes hold longer. Ever the professionals, they fight drowsiness by magnifying the shepherd's silhouette. But the tune seeps through cracks in concentration, filling each globe with syrupy glow. Hermes adjusts the tempo, now slow as rocking horse sway, now drifting like pollen settling on pond water. He embellishes with accidental bleats little half-notes, shaped like lost sheep-so, convincing that Argus's remaining alert eyes swivel outward, searching for strays that do not exist. The distraction costs precious vigilance. A long, breathy glissando floats up the cypress trunks, wrapping the paddock in invisible silk. One eye near Argus's left elbow pops wide in alarm, but its neighbor droops, contagious in surrender. 2 more join the slide into gray. Hermes hums beneath the flute line, layering a second frequency designed to vibrate directly through bones the world's coziest earthquake. Argus kneels, slowly, the ground shuddering under his bulk. Grass sighs, as though grateful for a moment of shade. With the giant's descent, an entire constellation of pupils tilts skyward, catching sunlight in sleepy arcs. Hermes softens the melody further, rounding each note like pebbles polished by centuries of river lull. The giant's main eyes, last bastions of duty, wobble, struggle, and finally sag shut. He exhales a canyon-long breath, settling into the earth like a fallen observatory. Silence springs, elastic and perfect. Hermes lowers the flute, twirling it once before slipping it back into nothingness. He leans on the crook, listening for stray snores, none yet, but the giant's chest rises and falls in steady seismic rhythms. Across the paddock, I.O. stands frozen, torn between relief and disbelief. 100 eyes lie closed, and with them the net of Hera's jealousy. Hermes steps lightly over the fence as though thread walking. He presses a finger to his lips, universal sign for "don't moo." I.O. inches forward, hooves silent on damp grass. The shepherd pats her neck in gentle reassurance, and for the first time since transformation she does not flinch at a god's touch. A soft breeze ruffles Argus's cloak, but he does not stir. One by one, distant palace windows brighten Olympus, waking for breakfast yet here. Inside this suspended moment, the guardianship of night lingers. Hermes fits a simple hemp rope around Io's neck, careful not to disturb the silken lead Hera left. Under his breath he murmurs coordinates: hidden goat path, river bend, the promise of a meadow where no one counts eyes. He glances back once. Argus sleeps on, peaceful as a hill that dreamed itself into flesh. Io follows her rescuer through the open gate, and every rustle of grass behind them feels louder than thunder. Yet the giant does not wake. The lullaby still rings in the valleys of his mind, replaying a shepherd's apology to the dawn. Dawn clings to the paddock like the memory of a dream. Argus remains kneeling, cloak pooled around him like a collapsed tent. His chest inflates, deflates. Each breath draws little swirls in the dew. All 100 eyes are closed lids, droop like velvet curtains after a gala. Hermes waits, reed flute still hovering. An elbow eye flickers open. 3 whisper notes half exhale, half breeze float out. The eyelid sighs, seals again. Satisfied, he tucks the flute into his belt and turns to his unlikely companion. Io's nostrils taste freedom and fear in the same inhale. The hemp rope feels lighter than Hera's silk, yet scratches a reminder that liberty is provisional. Hermes strokes the white blaze between her eyes. We leave slow, he murmurs, like dawn pretending to be fog. They step past the toppled sentinel. Argus's snores emerge in glacial intervals, bass thunder rolling under cypress roots. The fence lifts without a creak. Io ducks by a candle width. Outside, the air is less curated, but balconies above begin to bloom with yawning servants. Hermes whistles a moth's small note. Eyelids everywhere droop, as if the palace itself hits snooze. Behind them, Argus shifts. Hermes freezes. A distant iris, the color of amber sap surfaces, sees only shimmer and sinks back under sleep. The giant exhales a sound suspiciously like a satisfied yawn. They thread between topiary lions, past anemones still rolled against daylight. Hermes scatters forgetful dust left over from dreams he once delivered onto each hoofprint. The marks sigh, fade into ordinary turf. Marble colonnades recede, replaced by a goat track chiseled into cliff. The path coils downward, banked by lavender still holding last night's perfume. Hermes touches each blossom, and petals fold as though polite enough not to witness a getaway. At a fountain carved into the cliff, they pause. He lets Io drink, cupping water in his palm so it spills like liquid silver over her muzzle. Tiny rainbows leap in the droplets, then wink out the sun, not yet sure whether to announce itself. Further on, a bridge of fallen pine spans a gully. Hermes tests it, weightless as hesitation, then motions Io across. Her hooves drum a wooden heartbeat that vibrates up through sap and memory. Somewhere behind, the first temple bell rings for morning prayers. The sound chases pigeons skyward. Their wings flash blanc and ash against the blue, but Argus does not wake to count them. Past the bridge, they enter a meadow luminous with spider silk. Dew beads thread to thread, forming constellations at grass level. Io pauses, marveling. In another life, she would have knelt beside a shrine at dawn, thanking gods for such delicate embroidery. Hermes lets her look, then nudges softly. We borrow time, he reminds her. The bill comes in footsteps. They resume, cutting a silent swath through planets of dew. From a bend they risk one look back. Argus resembles a fallen tower smothered in morning light, disturbed only by snores that ruffle pigeons on the rail. Io feels relief, and a quick pang for a guardian who never asked to be architecture for jealousy. Hermes taps her shoulder. Compassion later distance now. They slip into a seam of firs where wind speaks exclusively in hushes. Io's legs, though new, find rhythm 4-beat cadence like a lullaby reversed. Hermes keeps one ear on Olympus. Far above, lids are lifting Hera, perhaps discovering an empty paddock. He quickens, winged ankles raising gusts that billow Io's coat. The mountain tests them once more. A stray echo of the lullaby rides the wind uphill, stroking Argus's dreaming mind. The giant smiles a tiny curve only hawks would notice, and sinks deeper. Every eye stays shut, content inside fields stitched from borrowed music. Io steps into shadow, vanishing like milk into dark water. Hermes follows, crook tapping a last beat against the earth, a quiet punctuation that seals the escape. Olympus wakes to find its most faithful sentinel napping, and dawn begins with a mystery measured in 100 unopened eyes. High above, Hera will see only tranquil marble and a drowsy sentry, never guessing that freedom has already slipped beneath the tree line, guided by a tune too gentle to confess its power. Hermes and the White Heifer emerge from the last curtain of firs into a gentle valley where dawn is still mixing its colors. Rounded boulders lie moss-soft, and the air smells of mint and damp stoner terrain built for quiet exits. Hermes slows so Io can graze dewy clover and calm her racing heart. The rope around her neck slackens. Trust is now their real tether. A silver river coils ahead like poured tin. Cross it, Hermes thinks, and 2 ridges will stand between them and Olympus enough to rename flight as freedom. High above, Hera wakes in that narrow hush between dreams and daylight. Habit drags her to the balcony that overlooks her private paddock. Something is off like a harpchord, missing its center string. Argus kneels where she left him, but the white comma that should be Io is gone. A vacuum snaps open in her chest. Through it she hears only the unnaturally even drum of the giant's breathing. Rage walks up her spine in steel-soled shoes. She descends marble terraces, each step a miniature thunderclap. Servants scatter, sensing barometric doom. At the paddock gate, she slams it hard enough to rattle iron from hinges, then strides across trampled grass to the dozing colossus. "Wake!" Her fist thunders against his shin. 100 lids flutter in chaotic sequence. Argus lurches upright, blinking like a forest of lanterns in sudden wind. The empty lead on the fence post tells the story more clearly than any apology. Hera tastes betrayal sharp, metallic, infuriatingly familiar. She spins, scanning for tracks. None. Hermes, she deduces, has feathered every hoofprint from sight. Yet she smells Zeus all over this. Equal parts charm and catastrophe. Argus groans an oath of failure, but Hera silences him with a gesture of silk over steel. "Find her," she orders, voice soft the way velvet can hide a blade. And if the messenger flits past, clip his wings. The giant bows and stomps off, each step shaking leaves loose from trees. Down in the valley, Hermes feels those first tremors echoing through bedrock. He guides Io into the river shallows. Water bites cold around her legs. She hesitates. Cattle dislike currents, but he whispers encouragement. Midstream, he removes the rope and lets it drift away like shed skin. "One more ridge," he says, "and Hera's fury will arrive too late." Io nudges his shoulder, a clumsy, wordless thank you. Overhead, clouds bruise the sky above Olympus. Hera is summoning weather. Lightning filaments stitch her hair with angry gold as she mounts a marble plinth and grips the invisible reins of a brewing storm. Each inhale sharpens her resolve. Each exhale drafts vengeance on parchment only gods can read. Hermes urges Io onward. They scale a bank thick with lavender. Petals furrow politely, unwilling to witness a getaway. A fallen pine bridges a ravine. Hermes crosses first, weightless as hesitation, then signals Io. Her hooves drum a wooden heartbeat that vibrates sap and memory. Thunder rumbles behind them like applause meant for someone else's tragedy. Past the bridge lies a meadow webbed with spider silk, every dew bead catching infant sun. Io pauses, awed. In another life she would have thanked the gods for such fragile embroidery. Hermes allows the moment, then nudges her. We borrow time, and interest accrues quickly. They press on through constellations of grass-level stars. From a final bend they glance back. Argus, distant, resembles a toppled tower wrapped in sunlight, guilt shadowing every eyelid. Hera's storm clouds climb behind him, dark plateaus stacked with lightning. Mercy stirs in Io for the guardian who never asked to be jealousy's architecture, but Hermes shakes his head. Compassion later distance now. They vanish into a stand of poplars that sway like emerald torches in the rising wind. Beyond those trees lie pastures untouched by divine politics, at least for now. As branches fold behind them, thunder cracks again, sharper, nearer. It sounds less like weather and more like a door slamming on old certainties. Freedom, Io learns, is not a sunny meadow waiting at journey's end. It is the motion itself, the decision to keep moving while chains rust behind you. She walks faster, each hoofbeat rewriting boundaries Hera drew in anger. Hermes matches her stride, wings at his ankles flickering like promise. Ahead, the valley opens toward a horizon still innocent of storms, while behind them the Queen of Olympus readies a reckoning bright enough to invent a new constellation of eyes. Mid-morning light skates across the valley, gilding river spray and setting dragonflies a sparkle, but nothing in that friendly shimmer can drown the tremor marching down from Olympus. Every footfall of Argus lands like a gong, and birds blast from treetops even before he crests a ridge. His cloak of 100 eyes bloodshot, some still glossy with stolen dream sweeps in overlapping arcs, hunting a single thread of white against every green fold of land. Hera's order drums in his skull. Find her, find them both. Below, Hermes and Io move in quick, nervous interval shadow to hedge to tall, grass-coozing silence over speed. The messenger's grin has folded into a calculating line. Every gust that rattles reeds forces him to taste the air for the copper hint of lightning. Io feels it too, an electric itch beneath new hide. Freedom, she discovers, is noisy with consequences. They reach a marsh where cattails gossip in wind-lace whispers. Dragonflies slice sunlight into blue confetti, yet Hermes hears only one sound, the bowed drumbeat of the earth, Argus's stride echoing through dark mud. Up, he urges, spotting a granite spur jutting from reeds like a capsized prow. Io scrambles, hooves slipping, but sheer will drags her higher until she crouches, white coat mottled by quartz reflections. Hermes stays below. From the cattails he snaps a handful of reeds, presses them to his lips, and exhales the lullaby that once undid Argus but thinner now, a ghost of melody meant to lure rather than blanket. Notes flutter over water like curious moths, bright enough to hook attention, faint enough to leave will intact. Argus appears, blotting half the sky, pupils blazing amber. Reeds crack beneath his boots. A boulder-large fist rises. The shepherd lowers the flute and speaks, voice clear as spring water. "Great Argus, when did you last blink for pleasure instead of command?" The question slides between plates of duty like oil through armor. For a heartbeat the giant hesitates, haunted by an old memory sheep drifting like clouds on a quiet hill, vigilance practiced for joy, not jealousy. Several shoulder eyes sag halfway. Hermes lifts the flute again, weaving a second theme soft, sorrow-tinted. It invites rest without mocking vigilance, a lull that sounds like rain promising crops rather than floods. One by one, rings of vision dim. Argus tries to rally, but memory weighs more than stone. He sinks to one knee, then two, cloak pooling in the marsh like a dark tide. At last, the primary eyes close, not conquered, simply conceding the need to dream. Silence claims the cattails. Cicadas pause mid-buzz. Hermes rests a hand on the giant's shoulder. "Your watch is over," he whispers. Moss already creeps along bronze greaves, as though nature has voted him monument instead of menace. Io descends, heart hammering louder than her hoofsteps. She noses the cloak, half mourning, half grateful. One elbow eye flickers open just long enough to shine approval, then seals forever. Hermes slips the flute away, breathing out a sigh that could almost be a prayer. Far above, Hera feels the seismic Husha thread plucked from her tapestry of wrath. She cannot name the loss yet, but cold doubt skims her skin like early frost. On a windswept terrace, she grips marble hard enough to squeal. "Trickster," she breathes, and storm clouds sculpt themselves into spears behind her. Hermes moves again, guiding Io onto firmer ground that smells of mint and sun-warmed stone. Behind them, the giant sleeps, already becoming myth, a gentle hill where reeds bow in respect, a cautionary lullaby petrified into landscape. His 100 eyes will never open, but in their place lingers a story, softening from terror into twilight. "Come," Hermes murmurs. "We still owe you a dawn without fences." No follows, each hoofbeat rewriting boundaries jealousy tried to carve in granite. Thunder mutters overhead, yet the rhythm now sounds distant like drums testing skin for a parade that may never find this valley. Skyfire gathers around Olympus like silk smoldering at the edges, heatless yet ominous. Hera strides through colonnades that shiver as she passes, each column briefly glazed by the static of her mood. The storm she summoned hangs above, undecided between downpour and spectacle, but grief now tempers rage, giving her steps the slow gravity of someone counting costs. Argus was a fortress built of loyalty. Losing him so easily feels like a crack in the marble of her certainty. She reaches the marsh where reeds still wobble from the weight that bent them. Dew glitters on mica sand, Dragonflies hover as though curious which deity has come to rewrite their shoreline. At the center lies the giant, folded in dream, his breath pushing small clouds of mist from cattail heads. He resembles a hillside that has borrowed a heartbeat quiet, immovable, strangely serene. Hera kneels beside him. Even reduced to sleep, Argus is enormous enough to cast a private dusk. She places a hand on his cloak. The fabric trembles once, but no eyelids rise. "Faithful one," she murmurs, the words tasting of pomegranate rind and regret. "You deserve better than a flute and a fugitive." Yet tenderness alone cannot fill the hollow that opened when duty slipped its leash. Something within her hungers for restitution, for a sign that vigilance did not end merely as an anecdote. She stands, straightens her robe, and utters an invocation older than clouds. A soft glow unfurls over the giant's Skenevery closed eyelid outlined by pale gold. One by one, small orbs of light lift free, leaving perfect, unblemished lids behind as though the eyes were pearls lately mislaid. These drifting spheres are not flesh. They are essence, the distilled vigilance of Argus, memories of every star he mapped and every secret he shielded. They hover around Hera like curious fireflies, awaiting orders. She extends a hand, and the globes spiral closer, settling into her open palm. They are warm pulses of watchfulness seeking new horizons. Hera's gaze sharpens. She knows exactly where these orbs will serve next. Across the marsh, a lone peafowl struts into view, feathers modest, blues muted like twilight. The bird has lived near her gardens for years, admired but never remarkable. Hera clicks her tongue. The peacock bows, its crest trembling under invisible wind. She releases the first orb. It floats toward the peacock's train, melting into the filaments of a single tail feather. Instantly, a circular jewel appears, a kaleidoscope of emerald and bronze with a pupil-dark center. The feather ripples, newly alive. Another orb follows, then another, each finding a filament blooming into an eye brighter than any gem. The tail begins to fan of its own accord, weightless yet commanding, each eye glinting with the awareness it inherited. When the final orb sinks into place, the bird trilsa sound like distant fountains caught in laughter, astonished by its own grandeur. Hera steps back. In the mirrored gaze of those feathers, she sees Argus's devotion reborn as beauty and warning combined. The peacock unfurls fully, tail sweeping the reeds like a jeweled curtain, reflecting stormlight in ripples of color no painter could bottle. Each eye watches a different piece of horizon. Together, they weave an unbreakable panorama. Hera exhales, half satisfied. What was lost is repurposed, not wasted. Vigilance will now travel wherever she walks, trailing behind her as a silent army of gazes embedded in color. Overhead, thunder murmurs. Recognizing its cue to retreat, the storm edges outward, diffusing into high silver clouds. Hera strokes the peacock's neck. Its new eyes shimmer in approval, a chorus of unspoken, "Yes, my queen." She lifts her chin toward the valley. Far off, she can almost sense Hermes and his bovine charge slipping deeper into anonymity, but the distance no longer stings. She has converted defeat into legacy, and legacy tends to outlive the momentary thrill of victory. She turns toward the palace, Peacock pacing majestically at her heel. As they ascend granite steps, Servants peer from alcoves, gasping at the living tapestry passing by. Hera says nothing. The feathers speak for her, each eye a reminder that some wrongs might evade punishment for a day, perhaps for a lifetime, but never entirely escape observation. The Queen of Olympus owns night's vigilance again, only now it comes in velvet hues meant to mesmerize as much as to warn. Behind her, in the quiet marsh, Argus sleeps on. Lighter without the burden of sight, maybe dreaming, maybe simply resting at last. The cattails sway like monks in reverent bow, acknowledging a transformation cloaked in mercy rather than revenge. In time, moss will climb his arms, birds will nest in the crook of his elbows, and travelers will mistake him for an oddly shaped hill. Yet the watchfulness that once defined him walks the world anew soft as feathers, bright as prophecy, impossible to ignore. Dawn has scarcely dried the dew when Hera begins her victory promenade through marble corridors, the newly anointed peacock gliding at her heel. Its tail opens by instinct, no dramatic flair, just a lazy fan that happens to ignite the hallway with pinwheels of emerald and bronze. Servants stop mid-breakfast tray, mouths rounding into silent O's. Every eye in that feather seems to greet them personally, tagging each witness with the memory of duty reclaimed. By the time Hera reaches the East Loggia, gossip has outrun her sandals, carrying whispers of Argus reborn in color. News spreads up the palace like ivy. Aphrodite, lounging on a chaise stacked with rose pillows, cranes her neck and actually forgets to pose. Those eyes, she breathes, half awed, half uneasy. Athena tilts her helm for a better angle, already drafting philosophical footnotes about vigilance as visual rhetoric. Ares barks a laugh that clangs off his breastplate jealousy weaponized into fashion. Who knew? But even he checks his reflection in a bronze shield, just to confirm none of those feathers are glaring directly at him. When Hera steps onto the high terrace, sunlight detonates across the train, and the gods' morning chatter collapses into hush. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. The tale speaks in 100 dialects of warning. Each jeweled eye gleams with Argus's old patience, tracking breezes, heartbeat flutters, unspoken apologies. Zeus arrives late, claiming administrative chaos, yet his grin wavers the instant he catches that living tapestry. Guilt needles him where thunder could not. He tries a small jest about peacocking, but the pun founders against Hera's serene, unblinking escort. The bird itself seems mildly surprised by its promotion. Every time a feather trembles, a different corner of the courtyard is suddenly under surveillance. Musicians tuning lyres feel judged for flat fifths. Nymphs hauling amphorae sense performance reviews on their posture. Even Apollo pauses mid-scale, ears reddening as though a wrong note might appear in the peacock's pupils. Olympus has acquired a conscience with plumage beautiful, implacable, impossible to ignore. Word slips down the mountain faster than nectar. A new omen struts the marble, its tail a mural of cautionary eyes. In seaside taverns, poets improvise verses about love that borrows disaster's wardrobe. Shepherds caution flock boys never to stare too long at cloud shapes that resemble wedding veils. Somewhere in a cramped attic, a young potter paints a plate with a single stylized feather, spinning moral glaze into art that will survive dynasties. Jealousy, everyone agrees, has found its mirror, and it is gorgeous enough to haunt sleep. Night brings no rest from the spectacle. The peacock roosts on a balustrade overlooking star-soaked valleys, Moonlight threads each eye with silver, turning tail, rings into tiny constellations. Gods who thought themselves immune to remorse lie awake, convinced those feathers can pierce ceilings. Down in the marsh, Argus slumbers lighter, released from watchfulness, while dragonflies settle on his still gauntlet like stained glass prayers. Farther beyond, Io grazes in an anonymous meadow, catching distant thunder that never quite reaches her, thinking how freedom sometimes echoes louder than captivity. And you, listener, feel those echoes, two soft vibrations under your pillow as the story tiptoes onward. Let the shimmer of those tail eyes fade to a comfortable glow behind your eyelids. Breathe slow. Jealousy has spent its loudest fury, leaving only residual hum, like wine glasses ringing after a toast. The feathers will keep watch for us tonight, so you don't have to. Settle deeper. Loosen your grip on wakefulness and drift with the valley winds that know nothing of storms. The next bend of the tale is waiting, patient as starlight, but it won't start until you're ready to dream. By the time a fortnight has wheeled its quiet stars across the sky, the tale of Hera's jeweled sentinel has crossed every mainland valley and island inlet like pollen on spring wind. No heralds trumpeted, different mouths carry different versions, but every version ends in the same soft lesson. Eyes watch, hearts pay. In the agora at Argos, a cobbler pauses his stitching to repeat the story to a customer who stayed for gossip. A potter nearby, hands wet with slip, shapes a jug whose handle curls into a stylized feather. An eye, pressed exactly where thumb meets clay. He does not know why he decorates it, it's only that the pattern feels like a ward. Down the coast, fishermen barter nets, while weaving side commentary. Jealousy, they mutter, is colder than seawater at dawn. One suggests that husbands should keep to proper vows. Another replies that gods chase danger so mortals may practice caution. Both laugh, but the sound is half swallowed by reverence. No one jokes about Hera's bird where echoes cling to granite cliffs. A gull wheels overhead, flashes of green on its back feather convincing one superstitious deckhand he has just been judged. Even children play differently now. In dusty plazas, they invent a game called Peacock Guard. One child stands, arms spread in mocktail display, while the others attempt to sneak past without being seen. Laughter bursts as feet scuffle, yet the game teaches stealth, patience, and the uneasy thrill of wanting what danger forbids. Mothers watching from thresholds shrug better. The young learn early that beauty sometimes shines with warning. Better they feel a tiny jolt of watchfulness before real risk prowls. In quiet sanctuaries, priests incorporate new cautionary verses into evening rites. Candles flicker against frescoes where fresh pigment paints Argus's eyes across a fan of feathers, a subtle reminder that altars record more than prayers, they record intentions. Penitents whisper apologies, not only for actions but for thoughts, wary that some unseen pupil might dilate at any dishonest heartbeat. When they rise, their shoulders feel lighter, as though confession itself were a rusted lock clicking open. Io's tale drifts south with migratory birds. Herding folk in Arcadia claim they saw a milk-pale cow grazing among wild thyme, her eyes reflective with human comprehension. They offer her handfuls of grain, bow slightly, and speak blessings of safe pasture. Those who touch her flank say she shivers like someone remembering skin, and they go home resolved to treat their own beasts more gently. Farmers plant extra rows of barley, for Io convinced that mercy sown into soil curves luck their way. Meanwhile, Hermes, slipping between melodies and errands, drops small clarifications into village firesides. Nothing grand, just nudges. He tells an innkeeper who drinks too hard that vigilance is lighter when shared, and that suspicion allowed to grow alone becomes iron. He tells a widow who fears remarriage that trust is not blindness, but a measured letting go, like loosening a kite string while still feeling its tug. These words seed themselves overnight, sprout into local advice, and bloom into proverbs carried on donkey carts to the next market town. Back on Olympus, the peacock's promenade has entered routine. Sunrise perch, noon patrol, twilight roost. Yet its eyes never dull. Each ring remains bright as enamel fresh from the kiln, and mortals swear those circles glow faintly whenever they speak false. Scholars debate whether seeing the bird once inoculates a person against infidelity. Poets insist it is simpler. Beauty that costs a lifer 100 lives bears memory in every hue. One cannot behold such beauty without tasting the caution it carries. And what of Hera? She savors her restored authority, but some nights she wanders the marble gallery where Argus once stood guard. Moonlight drapes the hall in silver cloth, and in the hush she almost misses the thunder of her own pulse. Almost, but not quite. Memory, she learns, is a second heartbeat. It slows, but does not stop. And in its rhythm echoes the truth she cannot wholly suppress. Vigilance can bind as fiercely as betrayal. A queen may own 100 eyes, yet still see only what her heart permits. So the myth filters downward, feather by feather, lesson by lesson. It reminds city rulers that oversight is double-edged, reminds lovers that promises are mirrors not, always flattering, always exact. And it reminds you, drowsy listener curled beneath tonight's blankets, that stories themselves are eyes. They watch us long after the telling, recording how deeply we pondered their shimmer and whether we carried the warning forward. Feel that weight settle gently, like a down plume upon your chest, no burden, just a soft reminder. Then let a slow breath roll out, loosening any secret knots jealousy once tied inside you. Far from Olympus, the story begins to molt into legend, shedding the strict feathers of fact until only shimmering meaning remains. In Thrace, an old midwife tells it in candlelight, rocking a cradle whose occupant has already surrendered to dreams. She omits the thunder but lingers on the eyes, reminding new parents that devotion must blink, or it turns to stone. In Sicily, sailors paint peacock rings on hulls before long voyages, not as boast or talisman, but as a promise that what they vow on shore must hold when horizons rise and no one is watching. Mountain hermits carve Io's name on cedar plaques and hang them at passes where goats wander small wooden sighs that turn into prayer whenever the wind arrives. Even the ground keeps souvenirs. High in the marsh, Argus's resting shape softens each season. Moss to lichen, lichen to soil, until spring flowers tuft from shoulders that once carried 100 eyes. Pilgrims lay wreaths, unsure whom they honor, guardian or victim, servant or hill, but certain that vigilance is never fully buried. At sunset, a hush settles over the reeds, and if the breeze threads just right, you can almost hear bronze eyelids sliding shut again. Peaceful, final. Io now lives quietly beside a looping river, where fields trade gold with every harvest. Villagers sometimes glimpse a woman trailing white fabric like mist through barley rows, fingertips brushing awns, as if verifying reality. They say she smiles at thunder, having learned its worst and survived. When children ask why a peacock's feather always points home on windy days, she kneels to explain how eyes that once enforced captivity now guide wanderers towards safer roads. Her story no longer aches. It glows, warm as bread left on a sill. Hermes, arrowing overhead on errands too swift for mortal clocks, tips an invisible hat whenever he spies that meadow. 3 soft notes fall from his flute never, quite reaching Io's ear, yet rippling the grain in gentle waves. Within those notes he hears the echo of a giant's measured breathing and feels a flicker of pride. Music, after all, proved stronger than muscle or marble. Then he is gone. Sandal wings turning pages in the sky, the world below closing after him like a book laid down for the night. On Olympus, the peacock keeps its steady patrol, tail a living aurora sweeping colonnades at dawn and dusk. Gods grow accustomed to its gaze, yet never entirely at ease. Each eye catches the smallest lie before it escapes the mouth. Even Hera sometimes lingers at a parapet and wonders whether the price of perfect watchfulness is the warmth that slips between blinks. She strokes a single feather, feeling the pulse that once belonged to Argus, and recalls that love, even jealous, even divine, must occasionally trust darkness to cradle what daylight cannot mend. So the myth settles at last like dew quiet, indispensable, reflective. It reminds rulers that security hardens into tyranny if no door is ever left ajar. Reminds lovers that promises live only while they can breathe. Reminds weary listeners, tucked beneath blankets while midnight tiptoes by, that stories are lanterns. Lift them too high, and their glare blinds. Set them too low, and the glow falters, but hold them at heart level, and they show just enough road. Night lies light as down across your fingertips, while a breeze from distant hills carries the slow breathing of trees, coaxing your heartbeat into a softer drum. Picture a lake, surface smooth as glass, and your thoughts a small boat, gliding in word-no oars. No haste drawn to the quiet center where ripples pause. Picture a single candle cupped in your palm, the flame a silent dancer who never tires. Its glow illuminates the warmest corners of your gaze, without reaching so far that it startles shadow. Now, every noise of day has slipped outside the room. Only a thin chorus of frogs and the hush of remote stars remain, keeping watch like gentle sentries. Take one deeper breath. Let the sharp edges of daylight curl inward, cooling in the dim. Exhale more slowly than before, feeling the weight slide from your shoulders into the waiting dark. You are drifting among clouds, woven from memory and hope, suspended where time walks barefoot and speech is unnecessary. Close your eyes. Allow the darkness to fall like soft velvet over brow, eyelid, cheek. Each muscle loosens, strand by strand, until even the quiet beneath thought feels padded, safe. The world continues its orbit. The story keeps its lantern high. You need only rest. When morning brushes the window with its first gold stroke, may you greet it still holding this calm, like dew clinging to a leaf. Until then, sleep deeply, dream kindly, and know that 1,000 gentle eyes watch the road so you don't have to.